Hi y'all, welcome to my shop. Today I want to talk about using the woodworm screw, one of my favorite chucking methods for an awful lot of projects. So if it's new to you or a challenge, keep on watching. The biggest challenge, let's start. First thing you want to mark the center of your bowl. Sometimes I use wooden templates. You typically use these to mark rounding the blank, but the blanks are rarely perfectly round. Sometimes you might have figure on here, you've got an irregular shape, so I've made an acrylic center finder. I'll have a link to making this in another video. So you just find the best way, you just look for these lines, distribute them appropriately, or if you got some figure you can maneuver it, then you mark the center. Next thing you're going to do, you're just going to drill a hole. Now you could use an electric hand drill if you like. I tend to do these on the drill press because I find it easier for me to square it up and get the angle right. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can use a little small center finder like this to get this square. And then to get it square, what I like to do is keep a number of little shims. And that way I can easily just put a shim under the thing to, this end's got to come up a little bit, to just level that bubble that way. Same way with this way, level your bubbles. Another quick way that can assist is using a small square like this and seeing if is it fairly well lined up. In this case it's got to actually, I've got to bring the shim. I couldn't see that bubble very well. Shim's got to come on the other side, and you can level it up easily that way, and level it up this way from the back and do the same thing. Use the appropriate drill bit. That's significant for the Nova and the record power. The woodworm screw that I use all the time, that calls for a 5/16 inch drill bit. You know, check to the manufacturer's instructions that came with your chuck.
My advice for the drill bit size is go with the manufacturer, but you can always measure at the root.
Typically this works. I find the 5/16 have worked for everything, hard, green wood as well as dried wood, but your mileage may vary. There's a few of them where the way the thread is cut, you may wind up cutting a slightly larger hole on dry wood because it's just too hard to screw it on and off. See what your manufacturer recommends. Once you got everything squared up, go ahead and drill. I hold very firmly on this thing. I find for large heavy blanks it won't spin on me. It doesn't need to be clamped. Drill an appropriate size hole. If you drill it too large, it's not going to make any difference on a blank this size. Now, speaking of blank sizes, this is a critical factor. This is just about the limits of the size blank you would want to use on your typical screw chuck. That is about 8 inches across and 4 inches deep. The 4 inches is more critical than the 8 because that's where your leverage comes on using a woodworm screw. The deeper your bowl, the more leverage you're going to get. So once you get past 4 inches, you might have an issue. So for example, I have no problems using a platter blank. This one's already been roughed out, and using a woodworm chuck. That's very common on the center because the blank is not that thick, so you don't get that same leverage. So what works on a platter blank, a large platter blank, may not work on a thicker bowl blank. Now, if you got a thinner blank, you're going to have to be very careful with measuring the depth. You're either going to mark it very carefully to the appropriate depth. Typically that's 3/4, but your blank may not accommodate that, and I'll show you how to handle that in a moment. Or you can use the stops on your drill press to stop it at the appropriate depth. This happens to be 1 1/4 inches, so I would want to be very, very careful and probably not drill 3/4. I'd drill 5/8, and let me show you how that works. So in this case, with this blank where I don't want the hole to be as deep, how we handle that is we just put a washer. It might be a quarter of an inch, might be a little less than a quarter inch, might be a little bit more than a quarter inch, but just make you a washer that's larger than your chuck jaws. And this also gives you a larger bearing surface, which makes this grip a whole lot stronger. And a 5/8 is going to hold this just perfectly fine. All right, so let's talk about woodworm screws a little bit. All right, so I've got a Titan. You know, every chuck manufacturer is going to have something different, but generally you're going to get a woodworm screw with the standard jaws for that chuck. Now for this Nova Titan chuck with these power grip jaws, you get a very long screw. With the Nova chuck, with the standard jaws, you get something a little shorter. I don't have the chuck that goes with this. This is a one-way set of woodworm screw, and chances are it'll still protrude 3/4 of an inch. Even though each one of this one looks a lot longer, it's longer because the jaws are longer, but by the time you seat it, it won't protrude more than 3/4 of an inch, and I suspect this one is the same way. Now, you can see from this one, there is quite a difference in the size drill bits you're going to need for the one-way. The other difference you'll find, depending on your chuck, you might have a channel for the chuck guides, these items right here that's in the center of the jaw, to actually register in here, or it might be a flat, as with these Nova woodworm screws. Use it only with the chuck jaws that it's designed to be used for. Now, we talk about a bearing surface. The strength comes not just from screwing this thing down, holding the threads. It's the surface that the bowl blank or platter blank is going to register against. Now, so the larger surface, to some extent, the larger the hole, but the stronger the hole. So with these larger set of jaws, you got a bigger surface. But with a smaller chuck, you can accomplish the same thing by making a donut that fits exactly inside those jaws when they clamp down on your woodworm screw. When you register, when you put this in and you get it lined up, whether it's got a channel or a flat against the jaw glides, and you tighten it down, you're going to pull this thing, you're going to pull it forward because it's going to register in the back. Pull it forward because as you tighten the blank on there, it's going to pull this forward. You got to be careful with some manufacturers' instructions because some of them, frankly, they'll lead you in the wrong direction. If you make a donut that is exactly even with the surface of the jaws, you're going to get a much larger surface for your blank to register on, and that makes it stronger by having this larger surface. These are pretty easy to make. Yeah, I've got pretty good lighting in my shop. I've had cataract surgery. I see pretty well, but sometimes I still have a hard time when I'm trying to fit this, you know, looking at it from this way. There are, on my Nova and my Record Power, there are actually little flats here to show you where it's flat behind it, but it's hard to see. But you know, it's easy enough to just mark it right here, right in the center of those flats. Those marks aren't going to disappear because there's nothing going to touch them. And that'll make it a whole lot easier to orient. For the long screw, same thing. You have even less to see because when you put it in, get the right chuck here. When you put it behind here, you're not even going to be able to see it behind underneath the jaws. But you can do the same thing by just drawing a line here and a line here where the flat area is. And maybe that might make it a little easier for you. It's going to make it easier for me, I can tell you that. Because I like this chucking method. Be aware, just like chuck jaws are generally not interchangeable between manufacturers, and sometimes even between the same models. Same thing with woodworm screw. Now, this is a woodworm screw for a one-way chuck, and although it clamps down, it fits very nicely, and I really like the design of this compared to the Record Power or the Technitool woodworm screw because it's larger and the threads are cut deeper. The problem is, even though it will lock down, there is just enough part back here that's not threaded that extends out that you're not going to get your blank to completely seat. So there's an example of incompatibility. This is the example of, I saw someone trying to use woodworm screw power grip jaws with the Nova, and they used them on the bowl jaws, and we had a similar situation in that just there, this area right here won't quite seat, so that you're going to have that same kind of issue. So be careful about trying to mix and match for where it's for one that's not where it's not designed. Now, Record Power, for example, says you can use their woodworm screw with their 35mm jaws, or their normal jaws, or their
130mm dovetail jaws.
So woodworm screw is one of the quickest and easiest ways to initially mount a blank for a bowl blank in order to just round over the back and add a tenon or a recess. I always add a little bit of wax. That seems to help. Having a rough surface helps because, again, your strength comes from the friction on the outside, not just the screw chuck pulling. And I just turn this by hand until I get it on there good, and then I turn the blank and tighten it up. Get it nice and snug. Make sure that it's touching all the way around. Put on the spindle lock so I can tighten it up a little bit more, because as you're cutting it, it's going to tighten it, and you'll never get it off. Or at least it'll be different. Again, it's best for side grain, not for end grain. End grain doesn't hold screws very well. It's not so good for very large projects. Again, ones larger than 10 inches and 4 inches thick. It doesn't work well for punky wood. If you got wood that's a little bit soft, you could always add a few drops of CA and let that dry after you drill the hole. It doesn't work real well for a very uneven face, a bad chainsaw face where you don't get even contact all the way around. It's great for platters. Again, it's great for not so great for end grain. It doesn't work well for outboard turning unless you get a left-handed thread for outboard turning. So if you do a lot of outboard turning and you want to use this technique, see if your manufacturer's got a left-handed woodworm screw. Always bring up tail stock support whenever you can, just an extra measure of safety, and then off to the races we go. Well, it wants to unthread, so spindle lock doesn't do that. So one way to deal with that is come back here and put a chuck key in the slot, hold it against your, and now try to take it loose. And it's coming loose. These can be a bear to get loose. If all your efforts fail, loosen the the chuck jaws just a tiny bit to break up the friction between the face of the jaws and the blank. If that doesn't work, go ahead and completely unscrew it, take it off with the woodworm screw, and use a wrench to unthread it. If you're a new visitor to my channel, leave a comment below on the one thing you got out of this video. As always, your comments and questions are important to me, so leave them in the comments below. Y'all stay safe. Come on back here.